Well, friends, it is good to be back with you again. And while Amy has a fun, catchy, punny play on words title for our day, I call this particular training Both and To Be Continued. And this is really kind of a part two to the Both and training that I have done for you in the past, really looking at how do we do worship, how do we continue to sustain and be successful in online worship or hybrid worship, really. I put a handbook in the chat. So there is a handbook that you can follow along with, and I'll invite you one more time. I'm going to put back up on the screen. You'll hear me, but I'll put it on the screen so that you can, oh, wrong thing. If you hold up your camera app on your phone, you'll be able to follow along with the handbook. And this is one of those handbooks where I have a lot of the answers already filled in. So you can, if you're just following along on your device, that would be helpful. Second thing I want to mention is that while I'm teaching here, I will be using the chat a bit. So go ahead and open the chat and make sure you change to everyone rather than saying to Amy or to me or whatever. We want to make sure everybody can see all of the comments. We're going to go about an hour and 15 minutes as far as the teaching portion, and we're going to open up to conversation at the end of our time together. So if you have questions that arise, I'm going to invite you to write those down, and then at the end, you can turn on your cameras and we'll talk a bit. So one more time, if we haven't met, my name is Jason Moore. My ministry is Midnight Oil Productions. I am just so thrilled to be back in Arkansas virtually. And some of you are in some of the cohorts that I've led, or you've been to the other trainings that I've done here in the conference. And this is a new training just for today. So let me open us in prayer, and then we will jump into our content. God, we thank you for the ability to gather, even if virtually. And we just give this time to you. Lord, I have a heaviness on my heart for pastors who are worn out and weary and tired in this season. And I pray that if we're feeling that this morning, that we'd be able to just sit back and relax and take in these new and exciting opportunities. Allow us to keep our eyes fixated on you as we have this conversation. So it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, friends. Again, handbook is in the chat. I'm gonna put it in there one more time because I think the people that come in after don't see the earlier posts, and we are going to jump in. So first and foremost, most of you have probably been to my Both and training, or you're in a cohort, and you've heard me talk about some of the specific hows and different strategies for how to do both and. But what I've been hearing a lot in the last several months from pastors is kind of a burning question, and that is, can we stop doing this now? Like, we've been at it for 18 months. It's tiring. A lot of our people are back in the building. Can we stop doing this now? And my answer is a resounding no. We can't stop doing this now, because I really see this opportunity that we are living in as a Great Commission moment. We have the opportunity to take the gospel to people who might never walk through our physical doors. And I think that if we are intentional, we can help folks connect and go deeper in their faith, both in their personal faith development, but also in mission in the world, if we continue to reimagine how we tell our story. Now, I want to, before I jump into content, just acknowledge a couple things. Number one, I know that this is a hard change for many of us. This is ministry feels like it's been turned upside down in the last year and a half. I also want to acknowledge that there is some pain involved in where we're at right now. We look out and we don't see our sanctuaries filled in the way that they used to be. And I want to suggest to you that the people at home are real people, and they really count. Sometimes we're only allowing our eyes to tell the story. And I think the folks in front of us matter, but the folks on the other side of that camera matter too. So I want to start by talking about our why. and why we should be continuing the practice of online and in-person worship. So it's a both and thing. So many of us jumped into this hybrid thing or online thing without really having a plan in place. It was more like a ready, fire, aim sort of situation. We had to do it because the world shut down and we didn't have time to strategize or think about, well, what's our discipleship pathway going to look like? And how are we going to bring people into our faith? It was like, let's put a camera in the room. We got to go. Like, we had 1 week to think about it. And I don't think it's ever too late to start thinking about the why. Let me ask, many of you have your cameras on, which is great. Let me just ask in the room here, how many of you went online in March or April of last year once the pandemic hit? How many of you are first timers in that world? Okay, that's so many of you. All right, and then how many of you were online prior to the pandemic? Anybody raise your hand? Okay, cool. I celebrate all of this, friends, whether you just raise your hand, whether you raise your hand first or second. I think it's incredible that we've taken the gospel to people in meaningful ways. I'm going to show a clip that I fear some of you have seen. If you came to the training with Rosario and I, you've seen this, so you can grab a cup of coffee while I share it. And if you didn't go to that training, I'm going to show it to you because I think it helps us to frame the conversation around why. I think Michael Jr., comedian Michael Jr. puts a really fine point on it. And so we'll start with that. And then we're going to break down 13 reasons why we need to continue our both and.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know? They always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3:00, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick. If you know which version I'm talking about, just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see.
Okay. Here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
So I don't know if I can say it better than that, friends. When we know our why, our what has more impact and more purpose. And I want to suggest to you that in this season where we were all kind of forced online, we jumped right to the how, right to the what. And I think it's time for us to back up and to think about the why, because I think we'll have more impact and more purpose as we think about the reasons that we need to do both and worship. I want to suggest to you that most of what we need to do to create an experience of worship that is for people both in the room and at home is not technical. It's really about language and the way that we give dignity and respect to our entire congregation. I think sometimes without really meaning to, we rank people by where they sit. So if they sit in the front of the church, they're not more important than the people that sit in the back, and the people that sit in the balcony are not less important than the people that sit at the floor level. And the people at home are not less important than the people that are sitting in the room. They're all your congregation. They're worshiping from different places. And I've had a lot of pastors, just spent 6 days in New Mexico doing some training out there for a clergy retreat. And I kept having pastors say, yeah, we only have, 30% of our people back. And I'll say, I'll ask, well, how's your offering? Oh, it's steady, or it's even gone up. What's your online numbers look like? Oh, we've got a lot of people worshiping online. Well, your people are there. They're just not in front of you. And so sometimes I think we tend to weight how we're feeling by the people in the room, and the people at home are still engaged. They're giving, they're still participating at home as well. So let's talk about 13 reasons why we really need to double down and underpin the both and the hybrid worship that we do. The first one, and I wonder if anybody in the room has experienced this, some who have left the church have come back through our hybrid worship, through our both and worship. Anybody had any visitors come back, not new people, but people you haven't seen in your church for a long time, come back during the pandemic? I see at least a few hands that are going up. Maybe they didn't like a sermon you preached, or you made them mad, or they liked the other pastor before you better, or whatever it might be. Oftentimes when there's that kind of tension that exists, they'll stay away. But what's happened this last year is they could reconnect with your church, kind of fall in love with it again. And I've had pastors tell me, I've had people I haven't seen in years walk through the doors again, and we didn't make an issue of it. I mean, it's just, hey, it's good to see you again. So we've had this wonderful opportunity to bring folks back into the church who maybe haven't been in it in a while. The second group of people I want you to think about are those who either felt shunned or maybe were shunned at church. Maybe their hair was too long, or they had too many tattoos, or they wore a hat one time. Or I heard a story earlier this year about a pastor. A pastor told me that she had this congregant in her church, a mom who said, I really just had a serious celebration on Easter Sunday that I just did not expect after about a decade. My son, who had gone all the way through confirmation at our church, had come to the conclusion in his life that he was homosexual when he was after confirmation. And she said that the church really had a hard time with that. And he felt like he could not go to church anymore, felt very much shunned in that season. Whether that was what he felt or what the church did, I can't tell you. But he spent a decade away from church, not going to church. And during the pandemic, when they took their worship online, he was able to worship with them in a less vulnerable way. He lives in another state now, and came home for Easter to spend Easter with his mother, and went to church for the first time in the building in over a decade. And she said, if not for this opportunity for him to connect in a way that was much less vulnerable, I don't think we would have ever gotten him back in the church. And he started to return to church on a regular basis in person. Let me also just say, friends, that I call this both and, not either or. I don't believe that online should be a replacement for in person. I don't think I think we still want to constantly invite people into the building. And I think these kind of stories inspire me in thinking about how we transition people from online to in the building. I do think, though, that we should not discount or think less of the experience that some people have at home in worship if we're designing worship in a way that really is transcendent of the technology. And I think that's possible with some intentionality. The third group of people that I want to bring to your attention are those shut-ins, those folks who can't get to worship. This has been the most incredible year and a half of worship they've ever had. Oftentimes our shut-ins feel a little bit forgotten. They feel like, they're not really a part of our church. And some of us have ministries where we'll go out and visit folks like that, but worship is not something they've really gotten to participate in a way that they feel like they're a part of it. And friends, what we did last year was we took worship online. And some of you have even really leaned into this idea of making it interactive and having an opportunity for people to share, prayer requests or offer reflection questions and so on. And so I've had a number of churches tell me their shut-ins just feel so cared for in this season. So that's a reason to continue. You might also consider, if you never have before, there's a couple of churches I'm not only on retainer with or in a regular relationship with Arkansas, but I'm working a lot with the Western North Carolina Conference. And I've had several churches tell me that they have developed relationships with local correctional facilities. So that's a different kind of shut-in. But what they have done is they have actually made it possible for inmates to worship. And I don't know how they work this out. I've heard this story on 2 different occasions where they've left a little bit of time after worship for family members to connect or have a little time with those inmates who are in jail. And so I think this is just, again, an incredible opportunity for us to live into the Great Commission, where we're taking the gospel to all people in all places. The fourth reason that I think many of us recognize this one if we were online before, but vacationers, business travelers, busy families, they can worship from anywhere at any time. I've even, my daughter is in both gymnastics and she's a cheerleader. My son is, she's a middle school cheerleader. My son is a cross country kid. And, the blue laws that used to exist that said that Sunday was a sacred day and we didn't plan things are gone. Those are not here anymore. And so there have been times where we've had to choose going to a family activity or going to one of my kids' sports activities over the time that church was. And I've actually been able to watch from the sideline or watch a little later. I've watched many a worship service in a hotel room on vacation. And so I think there's a great opportunity here for us to make worship live beyond the moment. In fact, that's the next reason, is that it used to be that worship only happened on Sunday. And the only people that got to benefit from that worship were the people that were there on that day. And I want to remind you that worship now has a life that lives beyond Sunday. Let me ask in either the chat or just those of you who are on camera, how many of you have noticed a growing number of people watching or worshiping on delay or after Sunday? How many of you have noticed that? Okay. I'm seeing lots of hands or one response there in the chat. Think about it. And I know this is something hard for us to kind of wrap our heads around. This feels so different than what we knew church to be in the past. But think about the fact that pre-pandemic, if you were not online, the only people that got to benefit from the worship you did were the people that showed up in the building, and that hour was over and they'd go home and that was it. Nobody else got to benefit from it. Now your worship lives on and someone can have an encounter with Jesus through the message that you preached 6 months later, 8 months later, a year later. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. Now our worship lives on, but we do have to be aware and mindful that if we want to create what I call evergreen content, that's the idea that our content would last beyond the moment, we do have to be intentional about our language. So I want you to think about developing evergreen language in the worship that you do. Now, if you watch the original training, you heard me say this: don't title your video, don't title your service on YouTube, September 12th, 2021, First United Methodist Church, traditional service. Why? Well, because nobody's searching that. Nobody's going to search for the date and the name of your church, except for maybe your people. But you have a really wonderful opportunity now to make that evergreen. So to call your service kind of the theme for the day, or what is it that you're talking about? So, maybe on September 12th, the day after September 11th, it might be, faith in the midst of pain or something like that. Someone may be on faith or on YouTube, and they may search faith and pain, and your service would come up. It's not going to come up if it's just the date and the name of your church. But if I'm somebody that's struggling with pain in my life, and I think maybe faith is the answer, and your service is called, finding your faith in the midst of pain or whatever, which might be something you talk about on a day like the day after 9/11, you'd be there. The other thing I want you to consider is that if our language is only focused on the moment, then we do create a sense of disconnect for people a little later. So on 9/11, that was 20 years this year that we not celebrated, but remembered. We memorialized. I'm going to imagine that many of you did make some nod to the fact that the day before was 20 years after we witnessed those tragic events and all went through that together. Listen carefully to these words, because if you weren't careful, you could have said this: boy, yesterday was just an incredible day of remembering things that happened. I mean, 20 years. Wow. I mean, it's hard to even fathom that it's been that long. So we had a day of remembrance yesterday, and we'll remember those things for a very long time. Now, I didn't ever say 9/11. So if you tune in in March of 2022 because you found the sermon title and you're like, finding your faith in pain, this would speak to me, and I just start talking about 20 years ago, can you believe it? You're going to say, well, what was 20 years ago? What are we talking about? Because if you don't actually say, yesterday we celebrated we memorialized, we remembered the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. Friends, I want to remind you that it's important that we capture, for posterity's sake, on the day we're doing it, what we're talking about, because the people that are there in the room or even worshiping with you in real time, they know what happened yesterday, but somebody who's worshiping with you on delay doesn't know. The last thing I want to suggest to you is that if you can create evergreen interactive opportunities as well in your worship. So you might say something like this, which I think tips people off at home and even online who watch later, if you're not careful about your language. A pastor, I was watching a worship service. This was actually the church I was attending. An associate pastor, without, and this was innocent, no malice here, but said we were worshiping from home. It was my daughter's 13th birthday. She'd had an overnight. We decided to worship from home that morning. And the pastor said, if you'd like to pray with someone today, not looking at the camera, by the way. So if you'd like to pray with someone today, we have care pastors in the back of the room. And I turned to my wife and I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to change out of my PJs, get some clothes on, jump in the car and drive 25 minutes over to the church because I'd like to pray with someone today. Her instructions were for that moment in time for the people that were present in the room. And what was a little frustrating to me about that was that they actually have a whole team of people that hang in the chat that will pray with you if you'd like to pray. But I want you to think not only about the people in the room and the people that are worshiping at home, but what about the people that worship on delay? So you might say, if you're worshiping with us in the room today, we have care pastors in the back of the room that would love to pray with you this morning. If you're worshiping with us at home in real time right now, we have care pastors, digital care pastors that will pray with you in the chat. And then if you're worshiping with us at a later time, you can drop a prayer request either in the comments, we come back and read every one of them, or you can send an email to the email address that's on the screen right now, and someone will reach out and pray with you. There are a growing number of people that worship on delay. I mean, think about this, except for sports, When's the last time you sat down to watch a television show in real time? Most of us watch on delay, even in our normal everyday lives. So I want you to give some thought to the evergreen nature of the worship that we do, because someone can be just as moved and just as transformed by the message you preached 6 weeks ago as they can the day that you preached it. The next one is that visitors can try us out now online before they come. I like to say that online worship is like the taster spoon of in-person worship. Anybody ever go get ice cream and you have those little taster spoons? Before you commit to buying the whole cone, you can decide which flavor you'd like. Let me ask again, since we can see each other, how many of you have had visitors show up at your church or guests show up at your church for the first time that have been worshiping with you online throughout the pandemic? Anybody had that happen? Okay. I'm seeing some hands go up. This often was the reason that I would hear churches say prior to the pandemic, we don't want to go online, because if we take worship online, people just stay home. They won't come to the building. And what I have been hearing all throughout the last several months is that churches that have been online for this last 18 months are seeing more in-person visitors than they've ever seen before, because you don't have to be as vulnerable when you worship at home. If you can put your head back in the experience of walking into the lunchroom and deciding where you're going to sit down for the first day of school or whatever, that's what it feels like sometimes as a guest or as a visitor at a church for the first time. You feel it's like showing up at someone else's family reunion or something. And what folks have been able to do online is get to know us and get comfortable with us, and it makes it easier to kind of walk into the building and be a part of the experience. I wonder if any of you have experienced this. I've had a number of pastors tell me it's been the weirdest thing. I've got all these new people that have been worshiping with us online in the room, and my regulars aren't coming back yet. So I'm looking out at a congregation I don't recognize. Some of you are nodding your heads. You've been through that. I had another pastor tell me kind of a funny story. He said there was a new couple. I just finished preaching my sermon, or no, it was pre-worship. Right before I went to preach my sermon, I noticed a new couple sitting in our sanctuary, and I walked out and I said, "Good morning. It's so good to meet you. My name is Pastor Adam." And he said, they looked at me like, yeah, we know that. We've been watching online for a long time. He said they all kind of laughed at that moment. They realized what had happened. Like, they knew him because they'd been worshiping online for a very long time. He didn't know them. I said, it'd be like if you went to see a comedian like Jerry Seinfeld. You went to go see Jerry Seinfeld, and he walked up at the end of the show and said, "Hi, I'm Jerry Seinfeld." I'd be like, yeah, we watched the show. That's why we're here. We know who you are. He said that was kind of the moment that they had. So friends, as much as we might think, I have had some people, in fact, I got a pretty scathing review of my both and training the other day, saying that I'm just allowing people to be lazy, staying home, or that I don't value community or things like that. Some of you have participated in those cohorts, and we're only one in, but I promise you, by the time we get to about 2 or 3, you're going to start to feel a sense of community. I've been doing a lot of cohorts like that. I think community doesn't just happen in the building if we're intentional about building it, but also the experience at home is a valid experience of worship. And I think we ought to lean into that. And so visitors may come and check us out both in the room and at home at the same time. The 7th reason that I think that we need to continue our both and worship and really need to double down is that the world is our parish, right? We now have this opportunity to reach people who are not just in our location. How many of you have looked at your analytics and you see that you have people that are not right in your town, or maybe even in Arkansas, that are worshiping with you? I'm seeing lots of hands go up there as well. Friends, those souls matter just as much to the kingdom of God as the people that share your zip code. And so it's a really incredible thing that we now get to take the gospel to people who are not in the same physical space as us. I have a friend named Ann Bosarge who is running a church called the Chapel Online. They have 32 countries that are participating in their worship right now. And these are people that are participating in Bible study, and they're giving. It's a complete experience of worship. I just had someone in a cohort last week tell me that they have a faithful tither from New York, and this church is in Charlotte, North Carolina. They have a faithful tither that every week sends a tithe check, or I'm sorry, every I guess once a month they send a tithe check because they feel connected to what they're doing. Another church in Charlotte told me a story about how they had a family that lives in Florida and came up to Charlotte to vacation so that they could take their membership vows and join the church. They're not moving to Charlotte. They're going to live in Florida, but they are going to be participants from there. They said, this church, we've been worshiping with you online, and this church means so much to us. And they're participating in Bible study. They're participating with their gifts and so on. Friends, again, I'm not suggesting to you that online it's not either or. I don't think it should replace, but we also ought to not discount the experience that people online have. I mean, we serve an omnipresent God, and on Pentecost, the Spirit moved into each of us. Doesn't reside in the building anymore. It's kind of funny to me sometimes. We used to sing those songs about the church being the people as Sunday school kids and all of that, and some of us are really struggling with the idea that we are outside of the building right now. Moving on, this is one that affects my family. I have a special needs child, and I'll tell you that sometimes on Sunday morning, especially when he was little, it was hard to go to church sometimes. You all may or may not be familiar with this phenomenon, but you go and you show up and it feels like you're being stared at and judged, like, oh, if they would just be a little bit more, hard on that kid or whatever it might, a little more discipline would correct it. There are mornings where it would have been so much easier because we had a really rough morning to be able to stay home and worship. Now, I don't think that people with special needs, kids, should only worship at home, but there are some times that it's nice to have a bit of a respite. But keep those folks in mind. This has been a gift to families that have those tough days. My favorite one of all on the entire list is that we now have the opportunity to dialogue in worship. I absolutely love this aspect of worship. It's something that didn't exist pre-pandemic, really. I was just at a church in Savannah, Georgia, about 3 weeks ago. They brought me down to do an in-person consultation. This was the very first Methodist church in the state of Georgia, not United Methodist. We weren't united back in those days. And John Wesley actually preached at this church. But imagine, an old classic, church building. It had the pipe organ, beautiful woodwork. The pastor preaches in a robe and a stole. Very traditional, high church traditional worship experience. But here's what he did, and this is an idea we're stealing, so you are welcome to commandeer this one if you like. He looked out amongst his people and he said, friends, we are about to share what we call our joys and concerns. And so if you've never been a part of our church or you've never heard those terms before, a joy is kind of the things we want to celebrate. A concern is those things that we want to lift up in prayer. And we're going to do that this morning in a way we didn't used to do. I'm going to invite you all to take your phones out. So everybody take your phone out here in the room. And you can navigate to our Facebook page. And he told them what the URL was for it. And he said, go ahead and navigate to our Facebook page. And we're going to share our joys and concerns this morning digitally. Now, it used to be that we would do this by just yelling out our prayer requests and our joys and our concerns. But the people at home cannot yell loud enough for us to hear them this morning. So go ahead, take it out. And if you have trouble navigating, you can also open your camera app, and on the front of our bulletin, you can scan that QR code and it will take you right to our Facebook page where you'll see the chat. By the way, if you're watching on a smart TV, we just put the QR code up in the corner so you can participate on your phone, even as you're watching or worshiping with us on your smart TV. Okay, you got it open? He also told them to mute it. All right, here we go. Let's see. This morning, I see Terry. Terry, you are with us here in the building, but Terry, you are celebrating the birth of a grandchild. It is so good to celebrate that moment with you. Thank you so much for sharing that this morning. Daniel, you are asking, Daniel, actually, you're worshiping at home with us this morning, but I see that you're asking for a prayer request for a friend who is suffering from COVID right now. We will definitely pray for that. Betsy, I see that you are celebrating a promotion at work, and Betsy's at home this morning worshiping online. Betsy, we are so glad that you are having this wonderful thing happen. Zach, I see that you are asking for prayer for your children who are in testing right now at school and just feeling a little stress around that. And he went through all of them that way, which meant that everyone was an active participant in that moment. You heard me say this in the original training if you participated, but I said we've got to get away from thinking of people at home as watchers. We don't want watchers of worship. We want worshipers. And the reason they're watchers at home is because we're not really including them. It's really about watching the people in the room worship, and we just are observers at home. We don't want viewers. We want participants. And so the way that we get to participation and actual worship at home is that we dialogue with them. I want to show you a clip from one of my favorite churches to talk about that is doing this hybrid thing so well. This is my friend, Pastor George Ashford in Columbia, South Carolina. And you're not going to get to see the part where he reads the comment, but because it would have been too long of a clip. But I'm going to talk more about this church in a little bit here. But they engaged their congregation at home. And he said earlier in the service, do you have any prayer requests you'd like to share this morning? And someone named Sarah shared a prayer request. And I want to show you what happened in the moment in worship as he reflected back on that. You're going to hear him even say, I wish I could see you this morning, Sister Sarah. Here's Pastor George Ashford dialoguing in real time with the online audience.
You don't have to look like what you've been through. Miss Sarah, you came in this morning and you said, Rev, the devil was riding me last week, but I already knew because I read the prayer call. And I said, Miss Sarah, your hip may have been hurting and your shoulder may have been hurting. I wish y'all were here to see Miss Sarah. Put the third eye on Miss Sarah. And I said, Miss Sarah, you don't look like what you've been through. You look like God has made a difference in your life. And I stopped by to tell somebody online, if you just get a little bit closer, you can see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. If you dare to get closer, just to talk with Jesus will make it all right.
So there's just a little taste of their worship. And I was actually there on that day. Incredible worship experience, but they dialogue with their congregation. So in real time, he started to go in a different direction than what he had planned because someone shared a prayer request in the chat. When he said this morning, you showed up this morning, he was talking about online, not in person. Now, I don't think we give all of our attention online, but if we can start to think in a way that we are dialoguing with those folks, it makes an enormous difference in the way that they are invited into participation. I also think that the participation piece is important, that we recognize that people online are worshiping with us. And so to be intentional about our language, inviting them into that. I want to show you another clip from a church here in my area in Ohio. I've actually not been to this church, but some friends of mine go, and they were talking about how great of an experience they have going to this church, either online and in person. And I want you to see how they started their service and how they used even some of the same language about not being a spectator.
Welcome to Restoration Park Church Online. I'm Ethan, and I'll be your online pastor with you today. Welcome. We're really happy you're with us. You know, whether you're a part of our family here at Restoration Park Church, or you're just checking us out online, or you're just watching from a distance, we really want to invite you to be part of our service today, not just a spectator. And when I say that, like, I invite you to sing along with the worship team. I invite you to pray when we pray and listen to Chad's sermon as he preaches. But more than that, I really invite you to be ready to take communion with us. We take communion every Sunday at Restoration Park Church. And it happens, we're going to worship, and then Chad will preach, and there'll be another song. And then I'll actually be on the stage in the sanctuary leading us in communion. So I urge you strongly to have something so that you can be gathered with us in spirit and celebrate the Lord's Supper with us, whether it's bread and grape juice.
So there was a bit of a piece. Now, you may have different theology about communion online, and that's okay. What I think we should be mindful of is that when we do communion, whatever your theology about that is, we can't forget the people at home. What do they do during that moment if we're doing it in the room? I know some churches that are pre-blessing elements and encouraging people to stop by throughout the week to pick them up so that they can participate. If you do communion every week in your church, or if you do it on the first Sunday, you can make sure that people have those things ahead of time so they can participate. I've had the opportunity to do my both and training now for every conference in the United Methodist Church in the US. And depending on where I'm at, the rules are a little different. Some people give instruction for how to do it at home. Pastor George, the pastor I just showed you, they do a drive-by communion after worship. So they actually have people that worship at home, and then they drive to the church immediately after worship. And when I was there visiting, it was the first Sunday, so it was Communion Sunday. And I came out of worship to a line of cars that were in the parking lot who had worshiped online, but were coming to receive communion in the moment there outside the building. And it probably took 20 minutes to get through all of those. So remember that those sacramental things that we do in the church, in the life of the church, matter to those who are not in the building as well. So how do we really lean into both and in that way as well? The next reason that I think that this is so important is that evangelism has never been so easy as it has been in this last 18 months. There are a lot of people who will not ask a friend to come to church. They're a little too uncomfortable with that, but it's not hard to post a link on Facebook. It's not hard to share that kind of information with other folks. And so if you're not asking your people to share your worship, share the link on your timeline. Let's get more people involved in our church. I also think, which doesn't relate exactly to this, but let's always make the invitation in our in-person worship and in our online worship to both experiences. So if you're worshiping with us in the room here today, just want to remind you that every week we worship online at this time, this address. And if you're worshiping with us right now online, we would love to see you even here in the building. So feel free to join us every week in person as well. This one really is close to my heart because I've got a wife who is one. Introverts and those with social anxiety sometimes have a little stress about the whole going to church thing. Any of you in the room, would you consider yourself an introvert? All right, we've got some introverts here. Very good. People sometimes, people like me who are not introverts don't understand this. We're like, what? Why wouldn't you want to be around everybody? My wife and I are very different. We'll go to a party and she'll say, "Can we leave now? I've talked to 3 people." And I'll say, "Wait, there are 3 people I haven't talked to yet. We can't leave." In fact, if my church had one of these, I think my wife would probably sit in this seat every week in church. See if there we go. When you don't feel like talking to your neighbor. Any of you have one of those seats in your church? That's for the introverts. My wife said to me that, wow, you're a tough crowd. I didn't even see a smile when I put that up. My wife said to me at the beginning of this pandemic, she's like, I've been preparing for this moment my whole life because she could socially distance. And she's not unfriendly. She's just, it's taxing. And so for folks who have social anxiety or are introverts, there are some weeks that it might just be easier to worship at home. I'm not suggesting, friends, that introverts always attend at home, but there are moments that there are days where my wife is like, I peopled so much this week, I'm so worn out, and going to church would be exhausting. And she gets a respite from it in those moments where that happens. Our 12th reason, we're almost through our list here. I had someone submit this one to me actually after I'd done this training the first time, but those with visual and hearing difficulties actually really love this online thing because they could turn the volume up as loud as they want. They can get up close to the TV. I actually had one pastor tell me that they do the captions. They turn the caption service on when they're streaming, and they have an elderly person in their church who attends live, doesn't hear very well, but will stream the service in worship in real time with the captions on so that she can watch the screen and be in the room and participate in real time. So there's a hybrid moment happening right in the room using the captions so that she can better understand what's happening in the moment, which I thought was kind of a cool thing. The last one, I wish I didn't have to say this one. The last one is, it ain't over till it's over. And this pandemic is not over. As much as we would like for it to be, we cannot say post-pandemic worship. And we don't want to lose all of the skills that we've gained and all the people that we've come to know in this last year, year and a half, by stopping doing this because some of our people are in the room. I had someone say to me at a consultation a couple months ago when I was in person in Wisconsin, they said, we've got like 90% of our people. Can we stop doing this online thing? And I said, well, don't those other 10% of your congregation matter too? Well, yeah, I guess so. Like, of course they do. They matter as well. So we don't want to stop this now. And I sure hope that we don't have any more quarantine or shutdowns, but we don't want to go back to crazy things like this either. Somebody sent me this photo and I thought that was just too fun not to share. So good times. So friends, those are 13 reasons that I hope that you will underpin your why. And when you have those naysayers in your church that are kind of upset or complaining about our online worship, I think those are some of the reasons that we should continue. Now, another question that I get all the time is it really worship if you're not in the room? And it's different, but I do think that worship is transcendent when we plan it in a way that allows it to be transcendent. What if they never come to the building? Well, I mean, I think we should always invite them to the building. But if people are having real transformational experiences of Jesus Christ in their life through authentic worship, you heard me say in the training, authenticity is more important than being slick or perfect. I don't think you have to have fancy cameras and fancy software in order to be authentic and bring Jesus to people. It's how you tell the story that matters. And one of the ways that I've kind of framed this whole idea is to think about the Marvel universe. I am a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe over there on the right. I go to the movies when they're in the theaters. I own a few t-shirts. I subscribe to Disney Plus, all that. But you know what? I have not bought a Marvel comic book since I was in high school 20 years ago. And does that mean that I am not a fan of Marvel, or that those stories have not had any? I mean, I've actually invested money in them, right? It's a different way to tell the story, but it's still a story. And when Marvel decided to form this cinematic universe, they didn't just scan the comic book pages and put them up on the screen. I mean, that'd be a pretty boring movie, right? If you just took the same thing and just broadcast it. They had to reimagine what the story looks like. So friends, I just want to suggest, now a purist might say, well, you don't know the full Marvel story because you don't read the comic books. Well, that may be true, but friends, I'd just like to think that if we reimagine our story and tell it in a new way, we could have some major impact. I want to talk to you, second big idea, and we're going to move through this fairly quickly. I talked in the first webinar about the idea of having a both and think tank at your church, but I didn't really give you the tools for how to do that. I want to give you the tools for how to do that in this particular conversation. A both and think tank is a team of people that would dream about what the next iteration of worship looks like. I really believe we can't just go back to where we were pre-pandemic. We can't just say, well, now that we're back in the building, let's go back to 2019 worship and do exactly what we did then, because not everything works in 2021 that worked in 2019 because we've lived through a pandemic. In the same way that my wife can no longer walk me to the gate when I fly after 9/11, 9/11 changed some things forever. As hard as it is for us to hear, I think the pandemic has changed some things forever as well. I also think that when we were all online, when we were in lockdown, what we experienced in worship online worked in a certain way that when people came back to the room, what we did online doesn't work in the same way with people in the room. So we need to look at our pre-pandemic iteration of worship and say, what about that works and what doesn't work? I'm not saying throw it all out. I'm saying what works, what doesn't. What did we do online during the pandemic, and what works and what doesn't work? And what does the next iteration look like? How do we create that next iteration? Some of you may remember that in the original training, I shared with you 3 clips from the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And we saw what it looked like pre-pandemic. We saw what it looked like when he went home. We saw what it looked like when he came back. And it didn't look exactly like it did before. It was a new iteration. An iteration is based on what's come before. So let's talk about this Both And Think Tank and who you might want to involve in the process of your Both And Think Tank. So we're going to start first by talking about forming the team and who should be on this team. By the way, friends, I don't recommend that this is a quick decision. I would encourage you to meet at least 3 months before you make any changes, at least 3 meetings. You might even say 4 or 5 meetings before you change anything. We're going to talk about the why this time. Last time we just jumped in without really thinking about the why. So forming the team. First is that I want to recommend that you have advocates for both experiences of your worship, both in the room advocates and online advocates. Sometimes all of the people that are making the decisions about online worship are not really fans of online worship. They don't even attend online worship. So I want to encourage you to have somebody that can speak for that crowd. Second thing is that when you're forming this team who is going to brainstorm about what your next iteration looks like, you want to recruit people that are willing to support any outcome, even if they don't like it. And if you got folks that can't do that, don't put them on your Both And Think Tank, because they'll kill the energy as you try and brainstorm and dream about what's next. And they'll create trouble for you later, because they'll talk about all the things that the other things that we talked about, the other opportunities, the other possibilities that I liked better. You don't want that. We've got to be a united front as we come out. I know none of us are in churches with people that have egos, but if you know anybody that is in a church that has egos, tell them that you got to recruit people that can put their egos aside when we have these conversations. Leaders who can remain unmarried to ideas. So those folks that are not going to pound that idea over your head until they've beaten everybody in submission. Folks that can come, share, and let it go after they say it. Out of the box thinkers. So people that are really, they'll do anything. They'll say things that aren't typical. A combo of church veterans, people have been around for a while, and people who are new to church. Who are those folks that didn't grow up in the church, that maybe don't know all of our church rules? They're great for this kind of process. People who have worshiped exclusively online. That may be the same as an online advocate, but if you have somebody, think about if you have people worshiping from another state, it might be fun to have them to be in this conversation of Both And worship. And then finally, the last one's pretty important: an unbiased facilitator or scribe. And why is this important? Because sometimes what I've had happen is somebody is standing at the whiteboard with the marker and they won't write down the ideas they don't like. And that is not good for the brainstorming process. You want them to write down every idea, not just the ones they agree with. So, if you need to pull somebody in that has no interest at all in the outcome, but would love to record it, I'm going to encourage you to do that. So let's talk about doing the work. I'm going to put a graphic up here and talk over it for just a minute. The work that you might do. First, I'm going to encourage you to start with the why. We've already talked about the importance of that, but why should we continue? Why should we iterate? Why should we try something new in the worship that we're doing? The second thing is that people tend to brainstorm together better when they have a relationship. So I'm going to encourage you to do 2 things. Do the work of the team, but also do work on the team. So I am going to encourage you to maybe include a meal with these conversations, or make sure that you do a little time where you just check in on each other. What was your highest high this week? What was your lowest low? build relationships, because the better the relationships are, the safer the space feels, the better creativity you will have. The next one then is just to have fun. I think it's important that we have a good time in this process. So I like to put things out like Legos and Play-Doh and, things, fidget toys, things that kind of keep people engaged. Changing systems in worship. Anybody who's ever fought the worship wars and started a new worship experience knows the pain and agony in that. It can be heavy. So let's have some fun in the process as well. The next thing then, friends, that I want to encourage you to do is to make sure that you actually have a process. We can brainstorm and come up with all these ideas, but if we don't have a process, we can lose a lot of creativity along the way. So establish a process up front. Make sure you're funneling your creativity toward consensus. I want to encourage you to make sure that everyone participates. There is nothing worse for the creative process than to have somebody in the room that sits like this the whole time, because it kind of sucks the energy out of the room. One of the things that I like to do with creativity and having fun is to maybe have an object like a squishy ball or a Nerf ball or something like that, and do popcorn creativity where we throw the ball and I throw it, over to Roy, and Roy catches the ball and he says just whatever first thing in his head is, and he throws it over, and Angie catches the ball and she says the first thing in her head, she throws it to Jim, and Jim throws it to Ruth, and we just have popcorn creativity happen. Can I also just point out one thing about this interactivity piece that just occurred to me, and why I think dialogue is important? I can see your faces right now, and when I say your name, you maybe don't even know it, but you light up a little bit. You smile. He said my name. I'm included. I'm a part of this. Friends, I think that's important for our people at home, and that's why when we do things like we get prayer requests or we encourage people to participate, when you name them, when you call them out, they feel a connection in that moment. So let's remember that in the worship that we do. A little off topic there for a second, but as I was calling out your names, it occurred to me. The next thing, that's the wrong thing. Hold on, we're going to come to that. The next thing then is to covenant together. That this is not just a task force, but I want to encourage you to encourage folks who are going to be a part of this process to really covenant that we are doing important work here and that we're going to work together to support it. There are 2 rules that I normally implement when I'm leading a church through a think tank. The last time I did one of these think tanks was for a church that was rearranging their worship schedule in the morning, which is a heavy topic of conversation. We did three months of meetings. We met for about an hour and a half at each of the meetings. And then the 2 rules were that you had to, number 1, come to all the meetings. You couldn't come to just the second and third one or just the first one or whatever. We wanted people that were going to track through the whole process. We didn't want someone to come to meeting 2 and miss meeting 1, and we'd have to catch them up and they wouldn't fully understand how we got to there and so on. We didn't want somebody who was going to miss the end and not understand. So you had to commit to all 3 meetings. The second rule was, and you heard me say this in recruiting, you had to support any outcome, that we were all going to walk away united in saying, this is what we decided, and we love what we decided. You don't want somebody, a naysayer, to walk away from your both and think tank and go around telling everybody, well, there were some better ideas and they didn't go with the ones that were the best ideas. You want somebody who's going to say, we did some great work together. I support the work of the team, and so on. And believe it or not, in that last conversation I had, that last time I led a think tank, I had people that couldn't agree to that second rule. They said, no, I can't be part of this. If you change the schedule, I'm not going to be happy about it. So keep that in mind as you are recruiting your folks. We're almost finished with the both and think tank, friends. I think it's important that we bring mutual respect. So regardless of status at the church, whether you are staff, whether you're a layperson, whether you are a pastor, whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're online, whether you're in the room, let's be very intentional about giving everyone an equal voice in the conversation. This is really important. And that whole idea of not being married to your ideas. I have seen creative bullies in conversations like this sometimes, where they just won't let it go and they beat everybody up until their idea wins. and that is not bringing mutual respect. So some of you know your folks well enough to know who those people might be, and maybe they would typically serve in leadership in other ways. I'm going to suggest for the Both And Think Tank that if you know you've got somebody like that, you not invite them into this particular process. They can be invited into other leadership roles, but maybe not this one. The last couple of things. Number one is just to keep it flowing. It's really important that you explore these ideas fully. You'll feel much better about where you land if you have lots of different options and that you've explored a number of different things. When I was working with that church that rearranged our schedule, at one point we had 5 completely different schedules on the board, on the whiteboard, that we wrestled through for these different meetings. And when we landed on the final one, when we found consensus around the other one, it was like, we did the work. It felt like we explored everything we needed to explore. We vetted these ideas and we arrived at the best one. So I'm going to encourage you not to just have one idea and implement it, but to say, what are some different things? What if we tried this? What if we did this? And then eliminate some of those ideas. And then the very last one that I want to encourage you to do is just to make sure that you have an end goal in mind for when are we going to implement our new form of hybrid worship? What's the date we're going to start it? Who is responsible for pulling these things off? What I've had happen with some of the churches I work with as a coach and as a consultant is that all of this brainstorming is done, all of this creativity happens, and then nothing is implemented. And it actually demoralizes your team. You lose a little bit of your political capital because you didn't actually do anything as a result. So I'm going to encourage you to make sure you name when it's going to happen, who is responsible for what are the measurables for success, and to really live into those things. So those are a few of the things that I think you will want to think about when it comes to Both And Think Tank. Let's talk about 5 big ideas to keep this Both And thing going. I want to give you some priorities to give some consideration to. The first of those is that I think it's very important that we create an intimate experience of worship. Intimate experience of worship means that we have to do more close-ups than wide shots. Sometimes what I see in worship is that you are capturing the entire room the entire time. And when someone is this big on camera and their head is this big, you can't read. David, that was a nice close-up there, by the way. I like that. The way that we frame ourselves, oftentimes for Zoom meetings, most of you are a proper distance from the camera. When we're about waist ahead, people can make out who we are. But when we get so far away, the further away I am, the more disconnected you feel from me. And so I want to encourage you to make sure you have more close-ups than far away shots. This is a good thing anyway, just because sometimes if you have a really far away shot, there are some weird optical illusions that can happen. So I don't know if any of you saw this photo. Do you see what's going on there? That made me a little uncomfortable. And so someone sent that to me. They were like, "Oh, this is not good." One of the things I've heard people struggle with, and I hope that we can help reframe the conversation a little bit, is that when the camera is up close, we can see it from the seats. And some of us have these beautiful sanctuaries. I want you to consider the fact that I've got my microphone here and it's on a stand. Nobody in your church complains about the microphone stands that hold up the microphones, because the microphones are important to the experience of worship. If you didn't have microphones, nobody could hear anything. So a microphone stand is not an offensive piece of technology. I also want to suggest that a camera on a tripod that is close enough to actually make out the people when I'm worshiping from home is not it's not an offensive piece of technology. In fact, I think if we reframe the thinking about it, that is not a camera. That is 75 people who just worshiped all throughout the week. That is not metal, glass, and microchips. That is our portal into this experience that allows people who are not here to be a part of our church. And so we ought not to lament the camera in the room. We ought to instead celebrate it as a visual representation of the people who are not with us right now, that may be worshiping from another state, or our shut-ins who are at home. And it's a much better experience for your shut-ins if the camera's up close than it is all the way in the back of the room and I can see a little speck on the screen. So I'm going to encourage you to get that camera closer, waist ahead. And then one suggestion I have for you is that you go out and you buy one of those little dry erase boards that that you might put a grocery list on. They cost about $9 on Amazon. I looked it up. And I want to encourage you to write the number of attendees that have been worshiping with you online since the last time you broadcast. So from Saturday or Sunday to the next week. And I want you to write that number and put it under the camera. Because pastors, even for you, here's the thing, if I preach like this, you're going to feel disconnected. You're not going to feel a sense of intimacy because I'm worshiping with the room. I'm making you a spectator in that moment. But friends, when we look at the camera from time to time, we make the people at home feel like we're talking to them. You'll be more tempted, you'll be more intentional about looking at the camera if you recognize that that camera is not a camera. It is the number of people that are written on that dry erase board. So let's start to frame our thinking in that way. I had a pastor say, you kept talking about that in the training and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It just seemed weird to look at the camera the whole time, or look, not the whole time, but look at the camera. And he said, I decided to test it. So one Sunday I looked at the camera while I actually highlighted a part of my notes and said, look at the camera. And he said, I was preaching, then I looked at the camera and I made that point and I moved on and so on. And he said, by the time I got out of church, I had 2 text messages from my parishioners saying, thank you so much, Pastor. It feels like you're talking to us when you look at the camera. Thank you so much. He said, I wasn't convinced. So I decided next week I'm going to try it again. He said, I got home from church that Sunday and I had a long email from one of my parishioners saying just how much I appreciate online worship. And I really love it when you look at the camera because it feels like you're talking right to me. So don't look at the camera all the time. Another little tip for you is to maybe put in your notes a little camera icon in a couple different places. You don't have to preach that whole section to the camera, but remind yourself, put a big camera icon in a couple places to honor your congregation at home. They matter just as much as the people in the room. The second big idea I want to unpack a little bit more here for you. You heard me talk about this in recruiting, but assign an advocate for both of your experiences. Now you have plenty of in-room advocates. So I really think the online advocate is going to be even more important. Do not have this person sit in the sanctuary and worship online with you in person. They can see too much. It taints the experience. So have them worship in another room in the building in real time. In fact, you could have somebody who is an online only worshiper doing this from home and have them text you. I want to just walk you through 7 questions that they might ask during the experience. What about this experience is working and not working online? Not everything we do in the room translates to at home. We might make some adjustments. Does it feel like they're talking to me? This is the eye contact question. I have one pastor that I'm coaching in another state who actually has an online advocate, and the pastor asked for this. She said, I want you to keep track of how often I look at the camera. So she actually makes tick marks on a piece of paper. And after worship, she says, I want to make sure I'm looking at the camera, X number of times. I don't know what her threshold is, 30 times. I want to make sure that 30 times throughout the sermon, I look at the camera. And if she isn't doing it enough, she'll come back and say, you only did it about 20 times this week. And she'll say, oh, I got to work on that for next week. So she's very intentional about that. Are you using language that includes someone at home? Here's a tip off to people at home. Sometimes we say, let's stand together for the reading of the word. Well, in the room, that's going to happen. But do you really think at home, I'm going to stand up with my phone and read the scripture? Probably not. So our language might need to be changed a bit. What if you said, there's 2 ways to do this. One, some of us are familiar with this language already. Let's stand together in body or in spirit. So that includes the people at home, because if I'm standing in spirit, I may be sitting on my couch in my pajamas with my coffee in my hand, but I'm standing in spirit with you. My favorite way to say it, though, is to say, if you're worshiping with us here in the building, I'm going to invite you to stand for the reading of the word. And if you're worshiping with us at home, find a posture that will allow you to fully participate in these moments. So let's remember that there are folks that are not in the room with us. Can I hear and see everyone? If you don't have an online advocate, you may not know until worship is over that people can't hear. You don't want to know after it's over. You would like to know in real time. So if I'm worshiping online, we'll say Amy is running the booth. I might text Amy in real time and say, hey, I can't hear anything. And then adjustments can be made in that moment. I'm sure, Amy, you run all the technology at your church, right? No, that's not your thing. Do I feel like a valued member of the congregation? When all of the language and all of the practices and everything we do is for people in the room, you oftentimes don't feel valued. So how do we change it up? Is the chat feature being used effectively? We're going to talk about a chat strategy in just a moment. I think the chat is an important part of the worship experience at home. And then lastly, am I invited to take next steps? So are you inviting me to be a part of Bible study? Are you inviting me to the church? Are you inviting me to participate in offering? Are you inviting me into mission? I have somebody just yesterday, who posted on Facebook. I posted that the numbers, the people at home count too. I posted, and someone said, yeah, they count, but they're not participating in the life of the church, the mission of the church. And I had one older lady, retirement, very, very well beyond retirement, that the mother of a pastor that I coach, say, that's not true. She said, I worship online because I'm afraid to go to a gathering that large, but I send my tithe check every week, and I've been participating in our online Bible study, and I've been serving at the soup kitchen with a mask on and separated from other people. So I am still fully involved in the life of the church, even though I'm worshiping online. I think some of us, I hope nobody here thinks this, but I think some of us think that if you worship online at home, you're just lazy. You're not willing to get up and come to worship. But I don't think, there may be some of that. But I think that some folks are just not ready to come back. They don't feel comfortable in this COVID world that we still live in. Third thing, friends, that I want to encourage you to think about is to continue to iterate. I shared with you in the original training that was my favorite thing about last year, was watching you all trying new things. And if it's been a while since you've tried something new, I want to encourage you to try new things. Carrie Newhoff had this word of caution for us. He said, too many church leaders will step back into the past the moment they step back into their buildings. And this is where I originally talked to you about the idea of creating a both and think tank. So keep trying new things. I want to make a suggestion to you that you Monday morning quarterback your worship experience. What I mean is, go and watch the films. So many of us are so involved in the development of worship and the deployment of worship that we don't ever actually experience the worship we do. And so we don't really know where those gaps are, where those moments. I mean, watch sometime and maybe you make tick marks to see how many times you look at the camera and you say, oh, wow, I guess I really don't do that. Or maybe I don't ever really talk to the people at home. This is not something you have to do every week, but I would encourage you, if you've never done it, sit down with your team and watch your worship from the moment you hit go to the moment it's over. Watch the entire archive without fast forwarding. Don't skip anything. See what your worship is from the point of view of somebody who is worshiping. The second thing I want to invite you to do is worship at somebody else's church that you've never worshiped at online. And you'll notice things will be more apparent to you there. Wow, nobody introduced themselves. I have no idea who. Oh, wait, we do that too. Man, there were really long gaps between. Oh, wait, maybe we do that too. You'll see yourself in a different way if you'll worship at somebody else's church that you don't know at all. Go to a complete stranger's church online. The next thing then, friends, is that engage people and really create community through the worship that you do. Again, if we're only broadcasting what's happening in the room, the people at home are going to feel disconnected. I really think that the long-term viability and sustainability of our online worship is really, it hinges on whether or not we're creating real community. So a couple just bullet points here. remember the idea of monologue to dialogue. Allow people in the moment to help shape the content the way that my friend George that I showed you did. I want to also encourage you to create what I called in the first training alternate moments. So some things in the room don't translate. You can show a video that the people at home can watch while things in the room are happening that might not translate. There may be a long thing that happens that at home, I'm just going to sit there and I might turn it off, that backs her to the camera, or communion might be an opportunity where you'd show a video or whatever that might be. Also, communicate directly with the congregation at home. My friend Ben Gosden at the church in Savannah that I told you about that did the digital joys and concerns, he does what he calls breaking the fourth wall. I don't know if I talked about this in the original training or not. For communion, he said, what I'll do, they have his mic on and they will actually turn off his mic in the sound system in the room, and he'll look right at the camera and he'll say, so he'll do communion. He'll do the whole liturgy. He'll say, come now, the table is open. And then they turn off his mic in the room. It's no longer going through the sound system, but the people at home can hear him. And like in movies and television, when the actor talks to the camera, that's called breaking the fourth wall. He'll say, now, for those of you who are worshiping with us at home today, we are engaged in the act of Holy Communion. Now, while this is happening, people are coming up, they're being served communion in that moment. And he says, here's how you can participate in communion at home. Communion is a sacrament. He'll talk to those folks and watch what's happening in the room. And as the room is finishing up, he'll say, let's rejoin those of us who are here in the building and pray together. And then he'll turn his mic back on and then he talks to everybody. So it's a great way to help those folks at home feel like they're a part of what's happening. You've heard me say this a couple of times. I'm going to say it one more time. I think it's important that we bring dignity and respect to our entire congregation. So keep that in the forefront of your mind. You matter just as much. If you're with me one week and you're sitting in front of me and I'm preaching, you matter. And if the next week you're not feeling well or you're on a business trip or whatever, you matter just as much the next week. And I want to bring dignity and respect to the way I treat you in that moment. I want to share with you an intentional chat strategy, and we are going to spend the last 10 minutes in conversation. So if you have thoughts you'd like to share, I'm going to invite you to start thinking about those now. Let's talk about, I didn't mean to go to that. Chat strategy. Let's talk about chat strategy. First off, I said this for a moment ago, but I want to encourage you to invite people into what I call a dual screen experience. Some people watch on a smart TV and they can't see the chat, but the chat is a really excellent way to engage people. It's harder to do that without a device where we can chat. So if you might get in the habit each week of saying, if you're worshiping with us on a smart TV, we want you to participate in the chat because a lot of great things happen there. I've got Pastor George Ashford that I mentioned to you. He's got at his church what he calls the Amen section. People sit at 3 high top tables. They have laptops, tablet devices, so on. They engage every single person that comes in the chat. Good morning, it's great to see you. They call them social media ambassadors. Second thing they do is they write on a whiteboard the attendance, and it started at 20, they erased it, became 50, erased it, all the way up to 130 the week I was with them. That's 130 households. So that allows the congregation in the room to see it and the congregation and the pastor to see it. The third thing they do is they actually give voice to some of those comments. So someone will write, preach it, Brother Ashford, and they'll yell out, preach it, Brother Ashford. So they're actually giving voice to the people in the room. So chat feels really important. I just went back and looked the week I was with them, August 1st, they had 774 comments throughout their worship, which means their people are fully engaged. 680 the last weekend I looked. So real quick, here's the chat strategy. And then I do want to get into some conversation with you all. The chat strategy. First thing is I want to make sure, include a welcome to every single person that comes in. As I said your names, you light up, you feel something in that moment. Also, and by the way, you can recruit your hospitality folks, the people that shake hands, greet at the door. They can do it in the chat. All they have to do is be able to type. And they don't have to even be fast. Second thing is just to take questions. Do you have any questions this morning? Put them in the chat. We'd love to answer any questions you have. Make them feel like they're a part of it. And if they have questions, they can hang with you on that. If you have screens in your worship, you often put up sermon points and scripture and things like that. You can do the same in the chat. Reinforce everything in the chat. Post links. So when you talk about the offering, share the offering in the chat, the link directly to it. When you ask people to sign up for events, put the link in the chat. Make it really easy for folks. Foster reflection. Maybe you are preaching on a topic. You say, this morning, our reflection question is, and you give them an opportunity to respond to that. Maybe after you sing some songs, you say, I want to remind you that our reflection question is, and then leave a little room in your sermon to say, hey, we've had some great reflections this morning. We're talking about our joy and our joy complete, and we had some great reflections about what joy is today. John, you said, this brings me joy. What a great reflection. Andrew, you said, this is what brings me joy. And when people hear their comments, their concerns, they feel like they're a part of it. And the last one, friends, is just to invite follow-up. A lot of us feel like these folks online are a complete mystery. And the reason they're a mystery is that we aren't really collecting any information from them. We're not inviting them into a next step. So have an online connect card or some way to kind of gather information. There's a free website called Flowcode, 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 that will let you build an online form for free. And it also will give you a little QR code that you can use. So you can put it on the screen and you say, hey, we'd love for you to register your attendance day. Just put your phone up to the screen and you can do that. And it'll lead them through everything. And the very last thought, and then we are going to talk about, just talk for a bit, is to just keep casting vision. People tend to resist what they don't understand. And some of us still don't fully understand these things. Revisit the why with your folks, revisit those 13 reasons, and meet with your both and think tank, get them together to dream together. And friends, I want to say again, we have not really had much time to explore what our rites and rituals are for online worship. And I think we've got to start to explore what those things are. So we know what they are for the room, but they don't all translate. How can we begin to think in those terms? There are a couple other things there in the handbook that are really just reminders of the last event. We've got multiple congregations or audiences we serve, and the both and audit will help you as you plan. All right. I'm sorry. I went a little longer today, but I can hang a few extra minutes. So who's got questions? Who has reflections you'd like to share? There's a button at the bottom of your screen called reactions. And if you click on that, you can raise your hand and I will be glad to call on you and hear any reflections or any questions you have or anything you'd like to talk about in these moments. Don't everybody talk at once. This is all right. Daniel, go ahead. You can unmute.
Yeah, we also offer a local radio and TV broadcast, and I'm more curious about how to engage them in with some of this dual screen or online participation.
Yes, great question. So I have one church I'm working with that does they do two different things. One, actually two different churches. One of them, they are still doing a drive-in service simultaneous outside. So they have people pull up in the parking lot. They don't come in the building, but there is worship happening in the building, and they participate via an FM transmitter in the parking lot. And so one of the ways they're inviting participation is through texting. So you can text in your response to this phone number. And so they're including some of those. So, hey, we have a response this morning from someone that's actually joined us in the parking lot today. And they know that because of the text. They give those if you're worshiping with us on one other consideration that I think we have to give to folks that are doing audio based worship. So I have another pastor friend who does what I call multiple hybrid. He talks to the room, they stream it online. I think they may broadcast on TV, but he also clips a lapel mic to his collar and it has it dialed up to freeconferencecall.com. So the people in his congregation who don't know how to use a smartphone can call in and listen. you know, when you have people that are only participating via audio, you have to be mindful of your language. Like last week, Apple put out, or 2 weeks ago, put out their new iPhone. I didn't get it, but I have the last version. If you're not careful, you'll do this in worship. You'll say, "Look what I got! Isn't it cool?" Like it's the latest and greatest. It's got more cameras, and if I'm an online or an audio only listener, I'm like, "What is he talking about?" Because I never said, "Look, I got the new iPhone." Instead, I say, "Look what I got." And we think about those visual folks. So something just for you to consider, make sure that you're describing in enough visual terms the things that you're talking about in the room as well. And then, I think it's possible for folks that are participating over the radio, if they wanted to, they could certainly open the chat, but I think text would be your best bet there. So those are a few thoughts I would have on that. Love that you're doing those things though. Andrew, your hand is up.
Sorry, I was like waving and raising my hand. I got confused there. I think I was just praising Jesus.
That's okay. You look charismatic for a minute. It was awesome.
I don't know if this is more of a question or a comment, but I have folks that will often say, like you mentioned with your naysayers, well, the online piece is great, but it's not quite, I don't think they say real, or it's not the same. I think that's often what they say. But I think at least maybe theologically, we think in terms of what you're saying there is the both and approach. Yes, we see people engaging online, and we hope they connect in some sort of physical way as well. So I don't know if you have any comments with the desire to say, yes, we need that human contact in person, but
Sure.
Digital community is real community too.
Yeah, you raise a great point. I think of it like this though. Amy and I have formed a relationship over many months. We chat on the phone some, we text, we jump on Zoom a lot. I've never actually met Amy in person. We've never been in the same physical space, but I think of Amy as a friend. And someday, we almost got to meet in person a few weeks ago, but COVID didn't let us. And again, for those of you who are participating in those cohort calls, what I've seen in the cohorts I work with is that relationships start to form. I have a cohort I've been meeting with for about 5 months. And I sent out the date to everybody, and they said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that Pastor Stephanie has had a reoccurrence of her leukemia cancer. She won't be with us." And the whole group just jumped in. Let's pray together. And like there was even a conversation about let's all jump online and just pray together. To me, that's community, whether it's physical or not. But it is different. So I've just finished writing my book on both and worship. In fact, if you're interested, this is only the second time I've gotten to announce this. My publisher has given me a code for 10% off of the pre-order. So if you're interested, now it won't be out until like first of the year, but they are working on a digital option for people who pre-order. You can scan that QR code and use the code BA webinar 10, and you'll get 10% off if you'd like to order it. I'll put it in the chat here too. You're only the second group to even know about this, so you certainly don't have to feel obligated, but I get into much more detail in there. I put it in the chat as well. So let me pull that off the screen here. I wasn't here to give you a commercial. But I was just writing in the book about the fact that I have HBO Max, and that means that I can get any Warner Brothers film live in my house at the same time it's released in the theater. In December, the new Matrix movie comes out, and I was a huge fan of the original. They got a little worse as they went on, but that's the kind of movie that I am not going to watch for free in my living room. I'm going to go pay to go to the theater, because the experience with other people in the theater with movie popcorn is a much better experience, and for me feels more reverent of the material than watching it on my screen with microwave popcorn in my living room. I mean, there are advantages to that, but I do think, and one of the things I would love for you all to give some consideration to, if you haven't already, is what is your discipleship pathway from online to into the life of your church? And that doesn't mean just in the building. Like, are we doing Bible study online? Are we walking people through membership even? What about missional opportunities? How can we live into those things? I think if we don't do that, our online worship becomes a big revolving door, and people come in and they leave, and we don't ever get to know them. But Andrew, I definitely believe it's not either or, it's both and. And I would suggest for anybody who's feeling or fielding questions about that, you start to collect stories. What are some of the stories of people that have had transformational experiences of worship online? I've got so many of them now. We would go another hour if I told them to you, but I'm seeing lots and lots of really incredible things happen through online, and we don't tell them. Can I share just one final thought? I know I've got more time. I don't know if you have more time, but I want to share one more thought with you, and then anybody that needs to go can go, and I'll turn it over to Amy. There's a feeling right now of low morale in the church because we look out and we see a lot of empty seats. I said this up front, but I want to give you an idea that I had a few weeks ago. I think actually with our cohort. So maybe some of you have already heard, some of you have heard this, but not all of you are in cohort. So I'll just reiterate it real quick. And that is the idea of bringing back the old hymn board. You remember the hymn boards that used to say the hymn number and the attendance last week and the offering? I think part of the deal right now is we feel low morale, or we feel a sense of bleakness because we can't see everybody, but they're still there. So I want to encourage you to bring back the old hymn board idea. You don't have to bring back a literal one, but what are your numbers? Show your people. Tell the story of it. We've got 20% of our people here, but like 90% of our people are still fully participating. So I would encourage you to put a screen up if you have screens. Here's what our attendance online last week was, in addition to the people in person. Here's what our offering numbers look like. That tells the rest of the story. Let's give folks that whole point of view. And the final thought I want to share, and then I'll let Amy give us a final kickoff. In the last week and a half, I have had probably 5 or 6 different pastors tell me, I'm ready to throw in the towel. I'm exhausted. One pastor told me I applied for a job at a nonprofit, and if the pay would have been a little bit better, I would have walked away. One pastor said, if they shut us down again, I'm walking away completely. Friends, this is a heavy season. It's you all have worked so hard this last 18 months. And if you're getting to the place where you are feeling that way, please talk to someone. We need you desperately. And what you're doing is so important. So if you haven't felt celebrated, I just want you to hear, I'm celebrating the ministry that you're doing. I don't think your people have any idea of how hard you're working in this season. So, and also you're part of a connection. So maybe you partner with somebody else and say, hey, let's do a series together where you could do a few weeks and I'll do a few weeks, and give yourself a little sabbatical for a week or two and work with others, because we desperately need you in this time. You are doing incredible things. So I just want to say that. I posted something on Facebook the other day, and it's gotten 450 shares about just sort of where pastors are and how worn out they are. And it just exposed to me, I get all these private messages, add me to the list. I'm ready to throw in the towel too. So I just want you to hear, you're doing a great job, and keep up the great work. We believe in you. I believe in you. So Amy, I want to give you the last word.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you everybody for hanging around. Just a couple of things. We have been doing over the last almost 12 months a online discipleship cohort within our conference. And one of the tools that one of the exercises and a tool that we have that has been very helpful for us in trying to establish an online discipleship pathway, which Jason mentioned, is redesigning the house plan. And many of you know that, a couple of years ago, there were opportunities for talking about hospitality and comparing the church to a home, and that the front door is where you should have your greeting team, but then you should also have your greeting team in the kitchen area. And you should, all of this different things about in-person discipleship pathways. But when you turn that around and start with a clean slate of a house plan, and talk about and use it as an online discipleship pathway, it opens all new opportunities to bring people in and to re-message for that online audience. So let me know if you need any of those materials. I'll be glad to share those. I wasn't prepared, or I would have dropped them in the chat, but I'll be glad to share any of that information. Thank you so much to Jason for being here again. Just so much good stuff. Thank you. As Jason said, we need you. We love you. I am here to support you. And if you need anything, please feel free to reach out at any time, email, text, phone call, whatever. Everybody have a great day. This is being recorded. This will be available on the website probably by tomorrow. So once again, we thank you. And if you need anything, just please reach out. If you have questions, if you want to gather and have a chat about this, would love to do that as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.